To further the discussion, joining us on Skype on the NATO-Libya war is Ayo Johnson, Director of Viewpoint Africa. Mr. Johnson, thank you for taking time to join us on World News. First question, why the need to continue the NATO attacks with the embattled ruler no longer being an issue? What is the real motive here?
Well, thank you, Amir, for having me on Press TV. I think the real motive here is very much to ensure that if there are any remnants of Gaddafi's inner forces or security forces or elements of his army, they can be easily mopped up. And if the National Transitional Council and its ragtag army, as one would call so, because they're not very professional in some of the activities that they've done over the last few months, if they encounter any difficulties, then NATO would come quite swiftly and flush them out. So they're there just to mop up. And I would see that in a few weeks or even a few months, NATO and its services in Libya would come to a halt.
Well, Mr. Johnson, you say mop up, and that leads to my next question. The Western Alliance wants to monitor the situation and respond to threats to civilians. However, these NATO raids that we've seen have also caused many civilian deaths. Isn't this a conflict?
Absolutely. In fact, it puts a lot of problems for them. Throughout the entire 6 months that we've seen NATO bombard Libya and its security forces, especially that of Gaddafi's men, we realize that sometimes their bombs have actually injured civilians. It's not been targeted as they would otherwise have wished, and I think that's quite publicly known worldwide. So the longer a campaign of this nature carries on, the more likely NATO is likely to get things wrong. But somehow I just feel that NATO feels that the momentum's on their side. They've got Gaddafi out of the equation. Its army is very much in trouble, and there are very, very few remnants around, and they feel that they can stand their ground. I believe that's the reason why they're prepared to hang around.
And Mr. Johnson, finally, when do you think the no-fly zone resolution will be removed, and is it still necessary in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it is necessary, in my opinion, personally. I think the combat should stop immediately, personally. But I think the Russians and the Chinese, who have been very skeptical throughout the entire NATO mission, thinking that they've gone into it through stealth, they've deceived the UN to some extent, and public opinion has changed as to the motives behind the NATO operations itself. But I believe that the NATO operations would finish sooner or later because it's not in their best interest to stay in Libya any further.
Very well, we'll leave it at that. Mr. Ayo Johnson, thank you for taking time to join us on World News. Director of Viewpoint Africa joining us through Skype from London.
Not a religious one. The hecklers were quickly shouted down by the crowd with chants of inclusion.
We can do it over here!
Gary Anthony Ramsey, Press TV, New York.